a friendship that'll never ever end.
Run! It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. Reaction Beanie Yo 614. In the neighborhood, my brothers and sisters, as we proceed to give you what you need, we're about to go back to the man. We're about to go back to the myth. We about to go back to the legend, MrBallen. MrBallen Sundays being seen. And this is a very special reaction to MrBallen because this is my 100th reaction to a MrBallen video, y'all. Like, seriously, man, you can go check the playlist out right now on our channel, and it literally has 100 videos in it for you to watch. You know what I'm saying? You can start at the beginning, you know what I'm saying, for something that you want to watch when you're getting ready to fall asleep or whatever. You know, you just turn on the MrBallen playlist, and I got a lot of content from the man, the freaking myth, the freaking legend. But I digress. The title of the video is "This Story May Save Your Life." Sound like MrBallen got a valuable freaking lesson in this story for us, being team, and I'm ready to get into it. But before we get into it, my brothers and sisters, y'all know what y'all got to do. Get whatever you may need. Get what you need, please. We are back to the man, the myth, the legend, MrBallen. Y'all got what y'all need, y'all ready to go? Then let's go.
Today's story is a stark reminder as to why you should always read the fine print. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, the next time the like button asks you to edit one of their YouTube videos, agree to do it, but then just permanently delete their channel. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story.
Balling! The signal.
On the morning of August 7th, 1981, a 34-year-old wildlife photographer named Carl McCunn stood on the edge of a lake in the Alaskan wilderness and chucked a box of ammunition into the water. The splash it made was surprisingly loud in the total silence that surrounded him. Carl was on the last day of a 5-month-long solo camping trip in a very remote area of northern Alaska that was actually inside the Arctic Circle. A plane had dropped him off here in early spring, and he had set up his tent by this lake, which was surrounded on all sides by forest and huge snowy mountains. And during this 5-month trip, Carl had not seen or spoken to another person the entire time. There were no phones, no roads, no rangers, no people around for at least 100 miles. I mean, this is true isolation. Carl,
Like, can you imagine that, being isolated by yourself for freaking 5 months, not seeing no humans, having no communication with the outside world, so to speak? I don't know if I can handle it. I'll probably go freaking crazy. Or maybe I'll just be okay. I don't know. Let's go.
Carl looked up into the sky and listened carefully for the low roar of the plane that was supposed to pick him up today. But as he listened, he couldn't hear anything. But this didn't worry Carl, because he actually had only arranged for his pickup date, not the pickup time. So it was just at some point on this day he was going to get picked up. He didn't know exactly when. And so as he anxiously waited, he just kind of puttered around his campsite and continued to pack up his things. And as Carl did this, he remembered that the type of plane that was going to be picking him up today, it was his buddy Rory's plane, it was really small. and there was a chance that he couldn't actually fit all of his belongings on the plane. And so in anticipation of this, he had identified that he didn't need all of his ammo. And so that's why he was chucking his ammo into the lake, basically in preparation for pickup. Just then, a breeze kicked up, and so Carl zipped his parka up to his chin. This was actually the so-called warm season in the Arctic Circle, but warm in the Arctic Circle meant still near freezing temperatures at night. And as much as Carl loved being out in the wilderness, doing these solo camping trips out in the middle of nowhere, he really was excited to get back to his home in Anchorage, Alaska, and see his friends and call his dad and, be in a nice warm house for once. Carl was about to chuck his 6th and final box of ammunition into the lake when he heard the loud sound of a wolf howling on the other side of the lake. And it made him stop for a second, and he decided that, you know what, maybe until the plane gets here, I'll hold on to at least 1 box of ammunition. So,
yes, man, I was gonna say that earlier. Elf holding on to 1, he should have never threw none of this ammunition into the freaking lake until he seen the plane landing to pick his ass up. You know what I'm saying, man? I would have kept all my ammo out here in the wilderness by my freaking self. You got wolves, you got bears, you got mountain lions. Hell, you may have a human out there that ain't up to no good.
So he stuck this final box into his bag, he picked it up, and then he walked along the shoreline up to where he had rigged a net to catch some fish. And when he got to the net, he saw he had caught 2 trout. And so he scooped the fish out, he went back to his campsite, he made a fire, cooked the fish, and as he sat down to eat them, he just kept looking up to the sky and listening, hoping for this plane to arrive soon. When he was done eating, Carl made a quick entry into his diary, kind of detailing the last day at camp, and then he finished packing up all his stuff, and he brought it all down to the waterline, ready to be picked up, and then he sat on his trunk, again, just kind of waiting for his friend to show up. And by this time, it was about mid-afternoon, and still no sign of the plane. But nonetheless, Carl sat there kind of taking in the scene, this beautiful lake and nature. I mean, this is the last time he's going to be here, and so he's trying to appreciate it. After all, this had been a really successful photography trip. He had shot 500 rolls of film that he knew he could sell, and that would make enough money that he'd be able to do this again the following year. And so as Carl sat there taking in the scene and daydreaming about next year's trip, he noticed the sun was beginning to set. And when he noticed this was kind of like the first time that Carl actually became worried. This far north, the sun stayed out for nearly 20 hours a day in the summer. And so if the sun was setting right now, that meant it had to be near midnight. And so his friend Rory, who was supposed to pick him up today, at some point today, well, now that we've hit midnight, Carl knew his friend had officially missed the date. And Carl had no way of contacting him to see what had happened or when he would be here. And so as dusk fell, and still there was no sign of Rory, Carl continued to get more and more anxious. And finally, he had to reset up his tent, and he crawled inside, got in a sleeping bag, and went to sleep praying that his friend would be there the next day. The next day, Carl got up early and packed up his stuff and waited by the shoreline for his friend, but all day he waited, and the plane still never came. Carl tried to convince himself that, maybe his friend got mixed up on the dates, or, maybe something came up that's delayed him a couple of days, but he'll be here. But then another day came and went, and then another, and still no plane. And it was around.
And see, that's what he messed up from the beginning, y'all. Okay, if you not gonna be in contact with nobody else in the outside world, you need to be in contact with your homeboy that's supposed to be coming to pick you up. You know what I'm saying? I'll be calling him pretty much daily, or at least weekly. Like, hey, bro, we still on for whatever date that it was. We still on for. Okay, this was the summer, so we still on for July the 19th at 12 p.m. You arriving, right? You know what I'm saying? He should have stayed in contact with him.
Around this time that Carl remembered something that made him feel sick to his stomach. On the night 6 months earlier, when he and Rory had discussed pickup plans, Carl remembered that night had been filled with drinking. I mean, these guys were just laughing and having a good time. And at some point, as the beers were flowing, Carl had asked Rory, hey, can you pick me up on August 7th at the end of my trip? And Rory had said, yeah, I can probably do that. But Rory had also said that he would have to check his schedule first before he could 100% commit to this. And Carl, in his excitement about going on this trip and getting ready for it and all that, had just forgotten to follow up with Rory and make absolutely sure he could pick him up. And so now Carl was realizing that Rory wasn't delayed or mixed up about the dates. Rory wasn't coming. And Carl knew there was zero chance of another plane just happening to fly over the area and that plane picking him up. I mean, for the entire summer Carl had been out here, he had literally not seen any planes. His best hope was that his dad or maybe one of his friends would report him missing. But he knew that was unlikely, and it actually was his own doing. Carl traveled constantly and almost never told people where he was going or when he'd be back. And on one trip recently, Carl had gone out and missed his return date, and his dad had been concerned about him and so called the police. And when Carl had come back and realized what his dad did, he told his dad to never do that again. Never contact authorities if I'm late. I'm fine. And all of this meant now Carl was going to face a brutal Alaskan winter all by himself with limited supplies and only a single box of ammunition.
Damn, Carl.
Hey, it's Mr.
MrBallen commercial, but damn, Carl, you really put your foot in your mouth with that one. Telling your daddy, man, don't report me to the police. What? Man, you never know when something crazy could actually happen. You don't say no ish like that. And I guess his father taking him at his word, and his brother and everybody else. This dude is in an effed up situation. And I just hope he get out of it. But right now, I don't know if he is. But let's find out.
A few weeks later, at the end of August, Carl was still stuck out in the Alaskan wilderness. By now, Carl had fully accepted that Rory was not going to come pick him up, and Carl was doing his best not to fixate on his stupid mistake. He figured he had two choices. The first one was that he could just stay put and hope to be rescued. This was the conservative option. He knew how to get food and also firewood near his campsite, so he wouldn't starve to death and he wouldn't freeze. But this would only keep him alive. This would not actually get him rescued. The other choice was that Carl could pack up his campsite and attempt to basically hike out of here 75 miles to the nearest city, called Fort Yukon. Now, this could get him home, but with it came a much higher chance of death. If Carl did the hike, well, those 75 miles would be over extremely rough terrain with absolutely zero human-made trails. And so one little slip-up and he could fall and get hurt or get lost. And also finding food was sort of a toss-up, and the weather at best would be brutal and at worst would be fatal. Plus, the entire region those 75 miles were in was absolutely teeming with wolves. Carl knew both of these choices were bad. But he was running out of time to make a decision. The brutal Arctic winter was fast approaching, and if Carl was going to attempt this horrible hike, he would really have to do it soon. And so as Carl thought about what he was going to do, he trudged his way over to one of his rabbit snares, and he was so happy to see he had caught a rabbit. And so he took the rabbit back to his camp and he cooked it over the fire. And as he's eating it, he's thinking, you know what, this isn't so bad. I caught food for now. I mean, this will keep me alive at least for a couple of days. You know, maybe I should just stay here. But deep down, he knew the staying put option was not a real option. I mean, even though, yes, by staying here, he could keep himself from starving. You know, he knew how to get food and all that. Well, he'd still be a sitting duck for all the predators in the area, and there were many, and remember, he only has one box of ammunition. But just then, Carl heard the most glorious sound, the distant whine of a small plane engine. At first, he thought he must be hearing things. Remember, he has not seen a plane at all since he got here. But sure enough, he looked up into the sky, and a second later, he saw a plane flying directly towards his camp, low and slow. Carl ran in his tent and grabbed the most brightly colored thing he could find, his sleeping bag, which was bright orange. He ran outside of his tent and began waving it back and forth to get the pilot's attention. Carl saw the plane belonged to the Alaska State Troopers, and so he figured his friends must have reported him missing, and now the police were out to rescue him. A moment later, the plane passed directly over Carl's camp, so low to the ground that Carl could actually see the pilot looking back at him. Carl looked right at the pilot's eyes, and when Carl was nearly certain he had just made eye contact with the pilot, he threw his fist up in the air in excitement and jumped up and down. He couldn't believe it. He was saved. The pilot was going to land and take him home. With a big grin on his face, Carl watched as this plane, sure enough, made a big U-turn. And then Carl watched the plane make another pass over the camp, low and slow, which Carl figured meant, the pilot was looking for a place to land. And so as the pilot was doing that, Carl rushed to his campsite and began packing everything up. And as he did, he's kind of keeping an eye out, watching the plane, looking for it to land. But it didn't. The plane just kept on flying straight away from Carl's campsite until it disappeared over the horizon.
I knew Mr. Ballen was about to do that, man. I knew Mr. Ballen was about to say that, y'all. The biggest question I got right now is, did the pilot actually see Carl and just decided not to pick him up for whatever freaking reason? Or did he never see him for real? But the way Mr. Ballen was describing it is like he was so freaking close to him, to it's like, how did you not see him? Then he waving his orange sleeping bag and stuff. Like, oh my God, I knew Mr. Ballen was about to say that plane went away. Jesus, Carl, you are a pimp in a hard place.
For the rest of the day, Carl just stared off into the distance, hoping for this plane to come back. But it didn't. Lying inside his tent that night, Carl couldn't sleep. He was so shaken up by what had happened that day. He didn't understand, he saw the pilot. The pilot seemed like they were looking back at him. Why didn't they land? Why didn't they stop? Carl told himself that, maybe the terrain was too rough and there was no way for the pilot to land. That was possible. And so perhaps this pilot was flying back and getting another plane, maybe a float plane, to land on the water. Carl didn't know, but he felt like that could be a possibility, and it sort of made him feel a little bit better. But
I don't know if there's a possibility. He probably just thinking that to make himself feel better, like Mr. Ballen said. But it's just like, dude, Carl, what the freak?
He still couldn't relax enough to sleep. And so, knowing he was just going to lay there all night, he sat up, turned on his flashlight, and began looking for something to read, just to occupy his mind. Now, at this point, Carl has been out in the wilderness all alone for months and months, and he's been stranded for weeks. He has read all of his books and all of his magazines like 1,000,000 times. He's even read his diary 12 times. I mean, he's read everything. And so as he was looking around his tent, he was looking for literally anything else to read. And suddenly, he found something. His hunting license. It was like the one thing he had not closely read. Not an exciting thing to read, but new. It was just a little paper certificate with some rules and regulations and safety tips about hunting. And so Carl just began reading the front, and he read it all the way down, and then he flipped it over and he continued reading, but then he saw something that made his heart practically stop. At first he thought maybe he misunderstood, but no, he read it over and over again, and it was very clear. And so Carl looked up in shock. He suddenly understood why that pilot had left him. For weeks, Carl stayed close to his camp, just hoping and praying that somehow, some way, that plane would still come back. But it never did. And by the time Carl had actually accepted this fact, that really the plane's not coming back, well, by that point, it was too late to try to hike out. So all he could do was stay put. However, the lake had frozen over, so he couldn't fish. His snares all sat empty because all the wolves and foxes got to his catches before he could. By October, Carl was getting really skinny. By November, Carl was genuinely starving. On November 26th, Thanksgiving Day, Carl laid inside of his tent and made a diary entry. There would be no Thanksgiving feast for him today. His food stores were totally gone, and the Arctic winter was getting so bad. In fact, his fingers and toes were turning black from frostbite, and he was sick all the time and constantly had chills.
I just want to point out real quick, y'all, that I have no idea what was on the back of his hunting license card that stopped the freaking pilot from picking him up. Like, y'all know how I be trying to predict what the freak going on. I throw my hands up at this one. I don't understand, man. And it seemed like Carl about to freaking pass away. But whatever Mr. Ballen tell us at the end was on that damn hunting license is about to be crazy.
And as Carl wrote in his diary, he looked out the tent flap at his dying fire, knowing he had no more firewood. He knew he only had one choice left to make. He scratched a final sentence into his diary. He wrote, "They say it doesn't hurt." Then he set his diary on the floor of the tent near his rolls of film. Then he reached for his rifle and his last box of ammo. A little while later, a single shot rang out across the lake. A couple months later, in early February of 1982, Alaska State Troopers would find Carl. Carl was deceased. He had taken his own life. What Carl had only realized later was that when he made that fist pump, when he was so excited when that pilot had flown overhead and he thought he was going to get rescued, well, that fist pump had sealed his fate. Because, like it said on Carl's hunting license, a single arm raised in the air is the universally recognized body sign for all okay, do not wait. And so when that Alaska State Trooper pilot flew over Carl's camp, he did make eye contact with Carl. He saw him, but he also saw Carl raising his fist in the air and thought he was okay, and so he turned around and he left. If Carl had only read that hunting license a little bit sooner, he would have known to have raised 2 hands in the air as the pilot flew over for the universal sign that means, pick me up. And now, here is a clip from
Yeah, that was a valuable life lesson, man, that all of us should adhere to in some type of way. Read the freaking fine print. I can't even freaking talk right now. Damn, Carl. Oh, I know that killed him on the inside when he looked at the back of that and said, I did like this. I told him not to, I basically told the pilot to go away. Ain't nobody else coming. Man, I know that hit him terribly. That hit me terribly when MrBallen explained it to us, being team. I'm really hurt off that one. Kind of like made me sick to my damn stomach, man, because it's so effed up. What's the chances of him just celebrate? Yay! No, it should have been like this. Think about that. Why instead of just one hand, why he just went to accidentally just put up 2? Yay! Why it was just that one, man? Oh my God, MrBallen, that is so freaking terrible, man. That was one of them ones where MrBallen leave you just like, you feel kind of freaking helpless, man. Like, damn, dude. It's another thing I was thinking too was like, was Carl even freaking like, did he really see a pilot, or was he got to the point where he had started hallucinating? No, it was an actual pilot, and he just didn't know. Just, hey, read the fine print. I still can't say it. Read the fine print, being team. And I digress. So I'm gonna let y'all go, man. What a freaking story from MrBallen. This was a shorter one from MrBallen, but nonetheless, it was freaking great on our 100th reaction to one of his videos. And I appreciate y'all being here. And before y'all leave, just please hit that like button, comment, subscribe, and do all that if you ain't did that yet. And come on back on Tuesday, because we're going back to watch Nick freaking Crowley's newest video. And until then, my friends, also remember this. Love, peace, and happiness. Stay safe. Don't stop. Keep going. Yeah.